Hello. How's everybody doing? Oh, we got a couple people coming in right under the wire. So if my count's right, there's about 250. I'm saying it out loud just because I want you to appreciate. You can't see yourselves from up here, but I can. and there's a lot of you. Hopefully I won't need to like pull my ripcord and just sit here and like pull things out of my backpack and be like, oh, so I picked this up recently. And we can talk about what we came here to talk about today, which is Call of Duty Ghosts, Power, Paranoia, and Orbital Tungsten Rods. Hopefully, this will be about 45 minutes, which will leave us some time at the end for Q&A. There's one mic here at the front on this aisle only. But yeah, who here has played Ghosts? A smattering of people. Who here has played a Call of Duty? Any of them? All right. So what is a Call of Duty? Now, it wouldn't be a video essay if we didn't start somewhere ridiculous. So in the late 18th century, a new philosophy arose called nationalism, which is where national identity, so small n, just to differentiate, national identity became equal to or even superior to ethnic identity. And in America, this was really galvanized by the War of Independence. And 200 years later, they made a video game. So the Call of Duty franchise starts in 2003 as a clone of the Medal of Honor games. So the Medal of Honor games were developed, produced by Steven Spielberg in kind of this like tie-in with Saving Private Ryan. And after the third one on PC, the first two were PlayStation exclusives, which replicates the opening Omaha Beach sequence from Saving Private Ryan in a really cinematic way and created this new nascent genre of the cinematic shooter. So today in 2025, there are 21 mainline titles in the Call of Duty franchise and 22 spin-offs, which is a lot of games. Ghosts came out in 2013. This is the 10th mainline title, and the back of the box selling feature was the companion dog Riley. So this was the what they sold the game with was like, okay, so if you the best example of this really is Advanced Warfare, where they were like, we've got Kevin Spacey, look, he's like photorealistic face acting, big name Hollywood actor. That sort of trend of like needing some singular feature that they could really push started several games before that. And for this game, it was, there's a dog. But the way that it was presented in the promotional material really was like, this is your companion through the entire game. You are like, you've got all of these sort of mechanics and abilities that you're interacting with Riley as you like work through the game together. Riley's in 3 levels. We'll just let this, we'll let this roll. I shut my thing off trying to... Okay, is it back? Are we... There we go. So Call of Duty Ghosts, oh boy. So the plot summary, so it begins in the near future. The, quote, oil-producing nations were destroyed in some cataclysmic event America is in decline, and the Fed has risen in South America. The Fed, so the Federation of the Americas, have united South America via persuasion or conquest. It's kind of jumbled. So they have united South America, and they are now a threat to America. The other backstory, which is playing right now, is that at another time in another war, 60 men from a joint special ops team were tasked with guarding a hospital against the enemy. And they get like obliterated. 60 become 15, and eventually these remaining 15, they send one of them somewhere, and the other 14 like hide in the sand and take out like the entire enemy, and this entire cutscene is just so insane with its florid prose and its use of religious iconography, in that it describes them as being like anointed by the sand, and they become ghosts because only a single soldier in the enemy forces remains. Your main characters, so you play Logan, who you cannot see because it's a first-person shooter, so that means that similarly to how you can't see you, but I can. You, Logan, can't see you, but you can see your dad, Elias, and your brother, Hesh. So that entire backstory about the ghosts, this special ops team, these 15 special operatives, that's told to you by Dad in literally like a campfire story at the beginning of the game, and then something starts exploding in the background because it turns out that America has this orbital weapons platform called Odin, which is kind of a sci-fi favorite rods from God, so orbital tungsten rods. There's an entire level where you play as astronauts up on this, the control station for the weapons system. So weapons system on the left, control station on the right, and then the Fed manages to sneak on board the control station, hijack this orbital weapons platform, this weapon of mass destruction in space, and they bomb much of the southern U.S. So from Southern California across through Florida, they drop kinetic rods on it and blow it all up. Then the game flashes forward 10 years later. A bunch of stuff happens. You run around shooting things. Some helicopters glitch out, and you have to start a level over. And then you find out that your dad's a ghost, but he's still alive. It's surprisingly, you're never going to believe this, but the guy who told you the campfire story about like 15 dudes, he's one of the 15. It's not a great twist, but you know, I guess it is technically a twist. The main villain of the game is a man named Rourke, who is one of Dad's old ghost companions who went missing. There's a couple flashbacks where you get to experience this. You get to play as Elias, and the story there is that after Rourke was like lost in action, he falls off a thing into some water and is never seen again. He is captured by the Fed and tortured in a jungle pit, where they like feed him poison and blow all of the white off of him. That might come up later. That's interesting iconography. Oh yeah, he's their ghost now. So the Fed basically subverts him into being one of them. He becomes the main villain of the entire game, and he's Bane. Most of the game is a bunch of filler. There's a flashbacks. There's some underwater stuff. You blow up an oil rig at some point for some reason. You get captured by Rourke. He kills your dad. There's a sinking aircraft carrier. And then it turns out the thing that you sort of learn in all of that faffing about is that the Fed has cloned Odin. But this is the very important thing to remember, and it is said out loud. So you know, to call your attention to this. The important thing to note about the clone of Odin by the South Americans is that it's smaller. It's like less girthy. It's not quite as potent, but it is significantly more numerous. There might be some symbolism in there. I don't know. There's another space mission. You drive a tank. You fight Rourke on a train. You eventually shoot him and your brother, and all of the windows blow open, and he drowns. But of course, then there's some jump scare sequel bait at the end, and Rourke drags you off into a jungle pit. Okay. I don't know why I picked that screenshot. So Ghosts falls apart in basically every way. Like if we're talking about a bad game, like what are the ways in which a game can be bad? They can be just like technically bad, like unstable, it doesn't launch right. You know, that's one type of bad. It can be poorly thought out mechanics. It can be just not particularly fun to push the buttons, like the responsiveness of it, or the feedback that you get, or the rewards that you get, the way that it like respects or disrespects your time. Those can all create like a bad game, or it could be like offensive on some level narratively. Ghosts is all of these. It crashed a lot when it was new. The first time I played it, probably in excess of like 20 plus crashes. It's only about 4.5 hours long, so you're multiple crashes per hour. This was because of the focus in development was on the PS4 launch, which left the PC version in a pretty bad state. They've fixed a lot of this. It is a lot more stable these days, but it's still really easy to like soft lock various levels because Call of Duty games are extremely complicated on like a scripting level. So, you know, the player enters this area and then these things start moving and then these explosions go off and they're all kind of like timed in order to like occur specifically in relation to one another, and they're very, very complicated, and as a result of that complexity, they're pretty easy to break if you don't behave in predictable ways. The experience of the game, the gameplay itself is sluggish. There's multiple vehicle segments that just do not function the way that you'd expect them to when you're spending the entire time fighting against them. It's just kind of ugly. At the time, like even at the time, Call of Duty games were kind of like remarked on for being like, it's like, oh, they're just like shades of brown and gray, like very, very dull, very muted, very like, was already a thing that people were making fun of years before this game came out, and it somehow makes it even worse. The story is very stupid. There's a tremendous amount of backstory, and none of it makes any sense. I tried to give you a sense of what it is, but I avoided overdoing it because I feared that if I tried to really tell you what the backstory is, it would force me to make it comprehensible so that the words coming out of my mouth like connect to each other. And that doesn't work. There's a large number of past events that don't really line up. They mention a lot of like 12 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years later kind of stuff, and like none of it makes any sense if you actually like stop and think about it. Ultimately, when you back away from the story, the thing that you realize is that America is ultimately the antagonist here. They invade Venezuela, and the word invade is used. They invade Venezuela purely because they don't like them, and they're like afraid of them. And they build an orbital weapon of mass destruction. The game starts with America having Odin, this orbital tungsten rod, that is then hijacked, and that's apparently a bad thing. It's fine if they've got it, but if someone else takes our orbital tungsten rod. The characters are all indistinguishable. Two people I didn't mention in the plot summary, Merrick and Keegan, they're a couple of Dad's buddies. They escort you through most of the game. If you've ever wondered what it's like to play an escort quest from the perspective of the NPC being escorted, Call of Duty Ghosts is great. And this is a game perfect for people who just love being told what to do constantly by anyone, like just some authoritative figure just yelling at you all the time about where you should stand, where you shouldn't stand, what you should be doing. Merrick and Keegan, gun to my head, I couldn't tell you which one's which. They have no distinguishing like characteristics, and you are largely experiencing them from this point of view. It's like, okay, so maybe if they had put like a smiley face on the back of one of their backpacks, I would be able to be like, oh, Keegan's got the smiley face, Merrick is the fuddy-duddy without. Yeah, not particularly well-developed characters. There is at one point just, I find this one incredibly absurd. So I'm going to, we don't have audio, so I'm going to do the voice acting for you. There is a whole cutscene about ghost burial practices. In the event a ghost is killed, his remains are placed face down with his head pointed in the direction of his home, his weapon next to him. We do it this way so that when our fallen are taken to the other side, they can watch over us and keep an eye on our enemy. Dad was gone. Nothing could change that. But Logan and I, we were still here. The Federation was still here. Rourke was still here. This war wasn't over, not by a long shot. And then you go like, blow up an aircraft carrier or something. Okay. I need to remind you, there are 15 of these dudes. This special ops team was formed 12 years earlier. The only ghosts that have ever died were killed by Rourke during the course of the game. Not really an organization that I think would have like spiritual practices like funerary rites. I don't, yeah. So that's a little weird. And the whole thing ends with sequel bait for a sequel that never came. Okay, so all right. You fight your way to the end of this train, which is to say you follow your brother who yells at you the entire time, and do the things he tells you to do like a good little boy, including shoot him. Like he tells you to shoot Rourke with a very big, potent handgun, and the bullet goes through both of them and then the window of the train, which is underwater for reasons. And then there's a sequence, you drag your brother up onto the beach, you're sitting there, and you can just kind of sit and like watch the ocean for an indeterminate amount of time, or you can watch your brother. As long as you look forward or left, like nothing happens. But the moment that you look right, Rourke is standing there and like kicks you in the face. and you're both dying, but of course he has like villain immunity. And so he's doing perfectly fine. He beats the two of you up and he drags you away. And then at the end of the credits, there's a sequence where it's implied that like you've been stuck in the like the hole that turns ghosts into anti-ghosts. The sequel never came. The game was surprisingly well received critically. It's actually rated quite well on Metacritic, and the user rating is a little low. Like it's hovering around like 4.5 out of 10. However, that I went through and like I sorted it. The vast majority of the like 1-point user scores pulling it down are actually from Central American players in the last 5 years complaining about the state of their servers. Complaining about the state of the game servers. So it's not even like those are contemporary negative user reviews. It was quite well received by its target user base. Now, one of the things with Call of Duty that's sort of like well known is that like it's like, well, who actually plays the single player in Call of Duty? It's all about the multiplayer. And the multiplayer mode, the marquee multiplayer mode is called I'm forgetting. It's Nemesis or something. No, Horde. It's a zombie survival mode, and it was quite well received. It's apparently a lot of fun. The story is also dumb, but it's dumb in a like bad sci-fi movie way, where one of the ghosts, a scientist working for a ghost, went rogue and has like cloned a bunch of alien monsters under a mountain. And there's this lady scientist who's like being mind controlled by the alien hive mind to like let them out. And it's a very different kind of dumb, but a lot more fun. A lot of cinematic shooters as a whole, as a genre, it's not flawless, and there are some flaws that sort of like, no, let me put it a different way. There are compromises that are made in service of the cinematic shooter. So the way that things will be paced, the freedom that the player character is given, they're very much like kind of on rails, and that's a thing that can be criticized, but I don't think should just be dismissed out of hand, because like a roller coaster is literally on rails, and a roller coaster is a lot of fun. It's all about buy-in. You know, if somebody puts you on rails but like gives you a great time, and like it has a lot of inertia and you feel, you know, sort of the rush, then you can create a very tightly crafted experience in a way that a freer sort of sandbox environment just cannot deliver. All of those flaws or all of those compromises, because Ghosts fails on so many other levels, the suspension of disbelief is broken, the buy-in is broken, the sort of implicit negotiation of that relationship is broken, and it calls attention to it. And you find yourself sitting there going like, oh, I'm on rails. I'm not allowed to do anything. And one of the things I realized on my recent playthrough is that the language of video games is utilized in a way that is just completely like discarded and ultimately kind of like, I don't want to say violated, but like maybe discarded is the correct word, that is discarded. So in a normal kind of video game experience, you go through the game and you're collecting like power-ups, you're collecting new tools, you're getting new game mechanics that enable new ways of interacting with the environment or interacting with your enemies. And that is the specter of that is utilized in Call of Duty's Ghost. Is utilized in Ghosts, but isn't actually there. It isn't actually what's happening. Upgrades that you acquire aren't actually upgrades. They are gimmicks in the rawest form for scenes. So this one is one of the things that you get. You get thermal vision. You go into a factory and you're shooting a bunch of stuff, and then like a bunch of smoke starts spewing out, and somebody yells at you like, "Put on your thermal vision so that you can see." And you go through like the rest of the level, and it looks like this. There's a entire environment where like it's you do the whole thing. It's like, all right, synchronize. Okay, lights out. You plant a bunch of bombs that are going to cut the power, and then they go off, and you got to turn on your night vision and like run through the level and whatnot. There's a moment where you get a strobe, and we'll talk about the strobe more in a sec, but it becomes apparent that these are not actually upgrades when you're on the aircraft carrier and there's smoke everywhere, and you hit the button to put on your thermal, and nothing happens. It's not available because it was never, you were not being tutorialized on here's thermal vision, here's how it works, here's the scenarios where it's useful. You were just being given a toy to play with for one scene. Same with night vision. There's another level where it's like it gets really dark, and you're like, oh, I'll put on I don't have night vision, because you're not meant to have night vision because it's not actually a mechanic. It's just a filter for one sequence. The strobe not only, so night vision and thermal only function for about one level each. The strobe literally only functions for one room. Like it only works in one room, and if you leave that room through either door, it disappears. So, oh, also, all of these upgrades, like there's 3 buttons, so like N, F, and Q, that are just kind of chosen at random whenever the things were implemented. So there's no like consistent language of how these things are supposed to function. There's no slot that like these go in of like, oh, here's your special ability. It's just you walk into a room, N this time to activate the strobe. I didn't use a video of it because it is profoundly obnoxious. But yeah, you use the strobe, and if you walk backwards, even if you haven't finished the encounter, if you walk backwards and then back in, your strobe stops working. This sort of shallowness applies to all of the gunplay. Who here likes first-person shooters? Like, they're fun, right? Like, it's a fun genre. I love a good FPS. I like good gunplay. They're just kind of all the same. The commitment to realism means that tremendous numbers of the assault rifles all just differ from one another by like single-digit percentages in reload time and firing speed. And they're scattered all over the place, and they've all got like long names, and they include this optic. There's only 2 guns in the game that play any different from any of the others, and you have no control over that. Like, you can't choose to start with them. It just kind of comes down to whether or not someone is using it against you on a level, and you can pick it up and then use it until you run out of ammo and maybe pick up more ammo for it. It's deeply unsatisfying on just like a raw mechanical level. And this is what I was talking about earlier with like, are the buttons fun to push? Is it fun to push W and hold down left mouse button? Not particularly, because it's just kind of all the same. Levels are just kind of an incoherent collection of stuff. You get jumped by wolves at one point for some reason. There is a flashback where you play as your dad, so a flashback to events that happened in Caracas where Rourke was lost in combat, and then the next level immediately after also happens in Caracas, but it happens in the present. And you go through and do an extraction scene where you like shoot zip lines from one building to another, and you go in and all this stuff. An extraction that is like just 100% lifted from The Dark Knight. And it is followed shortly after by an airplane sequence lifted from The Dark Knight Rises. Because Rourke is Bane. At one point, you drive a Jeep from a glacier in the Andes, which is South America. You drive a Jeep from a glacier in the Andes out onto sea ice, and a submarine like rises, and kind of famously, the Drake Passage doesn't really freeze. So I don't know where this is, but it looks cool. And it's kind of the moment that you realize, like, oh, the people who are like writing this are kind of just trying to make they're trying to just make James Bond, but they're constrained by this like realistic military shooter, and the conflict between those is very much a conflict. So within Call of Duty as a whole, there is an incentive for variety and spectacle that overrides cohesiveness. The justifications for all of these things, the justification for why you're blowing up an oil rig, it exists, but that doesn't mean that it's like satisfying. It doesn't mean that it makes sense. It just means that like if you sit down to write a wiki of what happens, you can in fact find a line that's like, oh, okay, we're blowing up the oil rig. We're sending like 12 dudes to blow up an oil rig in order to lure away their entire navy? Are they really gonna send their entire navy to? There's a line about like, the military is a broadsword, and I feel like your 12 guys are not gonna be well captured by the entire navy. So I guess but it works. Like on paper, it works. They come down and you blow up their big battleship, but then they blow up your last aircraft carrier, but then you take over their space weapon, and so all's fair. And you blow up a lot of Peru and Chile for reasons. A lot of this is just a consequence of how the game was made. So the rule of hand at the time, the rule of thumb at the time was that a video game takes, like a AAA video game takes about 3 years to make. And Activision was giving their 2.5 dev studios at the time about 2 years to make them, which is not enough. So you're looking at all of your common elements. You've got just like ridiculous amounts of crunch. Sorry, let me explain. So the setup that Activision had is they wanted yearly releases, which is how they got up to 10 so quickly. They wanted yearly releases, and so they had 2 dev studios working on them leapfrog style, but those dev studios, like 2 years wasn't enough, so they brought in a third to make the 13th game, but then that third studio needed to be onboarded by the first studio, and so a lot of dev time for Ghosts kind of got like stolen by this process. And so what you end up with is a production pipeline that is working around this development structure. And so what's happening is, due to the complexity of these levels, due to the complexity of like, make a level where an aircraft carrier gets assaulted and then sinks. okay, that's really technologically complex. And so it gets started on years before everything else. They sit there and they brainstorm, what are a bunch of cool scenes? And there's nothing wrong with that. But they brainstorm a bunch of cool scenes, and then somebody is brought in later to be like, okay, why does an aircraft carrier sink? And write a bunch of dialogue for why that aircraft carrier sinks. So levels are started and the story is slotted in later. All right, so we'll keep that in mind when we talk about the plot. All right, Rourke, the main antagonist, is really just kind of a hazy cloud of half-realized themes, but the only one that comes through loud and clear is that he gives the Fed their potency. The line that you hear repeated is the only thing that can kill a ghost is a ghost. And so this ties into the next big theme that sort of like is just unable to escape is jingoism. So the US Marine Corps is a cult that utilizes all of the tactics that were applied to Rourke in the video game. Things like sleep deprivation, physical abuse, verbal, mental abuse, long hours, the whole like rah-rah, tear you down so we can build you up. That is what is used on Rourke. He is tortured and rebuilt into a ghost killer. And while the ghosts are nebulously just like special ops, tier 1 special ops, they are obviously Marines. They're coded as Marines. Video games love Marines in particular because Marines just like, they kind of have an excuse to like go anywhere. And like, it's like, oh, you want a scene set on a boat? You want a scene set on a plane? You want to be in the jungle? You want to be doing, I don't know, like you want to throw a bunch of scuba gear on and blow up a battleship from underneath? Like that sounds like a Marines thing, I guess. So video games in particular love Marines because you can put them anywhere in a way that like, well, the Army has very specific things that it does. So this cultishness is imposed on and amplified in the ghosts, and that's where we get like these burial rituals, these all of this pseudo-religious language, that they are anointed by sand. And it's also just kind of racist. And, the Fed orbital weapon is explicitly less potent, but numerous. The Fed is unable to like best America until they capture a ghost of their own, until they have an American asset who can give them their potency, and all of a sudden the Fed just starts like winning everything. They take over Odin. They capture all the best dudes. They're assassinating all of the other ghosts. And then of course, like in symbolism, it's difficult to ignore that when Rourke is being tortured and he is being rebuilt into an enemy ghost, the white is blasted off of him. When his mind broke, they went to work on his soul. So inside this story is a fear of subversion, of infiltration, of cultural poison. There is I just forgot the word. There is a propagandic narrative about America as being under assault from subversive elements, that the greatest danger to America is within America. The Fed's unification of South America is described as devouring, and all throughout it, America is presented as going to war for reasons that are important, while other people go to war just because that's how they are. And a lot of this is just the product of clumsy work. Like, I don't want to say this like, oh, this is a carefully constructed narrative in order to sell in order to sell this myth of America as being under attack. This is careless rather than malicious, but it does tap into running narratives of American fragility and the concept of the righteous war. And in retrospect, in Call of Duty Ghosts, we can see that cultural thumbprint of an America that needed to see itself as an underdog. And it is perhaps, maybe, we can perhaps be grateful for small things in that no one really played it. It was not, despite what the user reviews and the critic reviews at the time indicate, Call of Duty Ghosts was a turning point in the Call of Duty franchise. It was the first one to not sell. It was the first one since the very early games. So Call of Duty 3 was only released on PS3, so it didn't sell very well. But aside from that, every installment had sold more than the previous. And this was an absolutely meteoric rise in terms of like Call of Duty going from being a successful franchise to Call of Duty being the video game, to the point that an entire class of video game, in the same way that your grandma referred to just all video game platforms as Nintendos, you could just refer to all cinematic shooters, first-person shooters, things that appealed to a very like frat bro mentality as a Call of Duty. So this absolutely meteoric rise in the franchise saw its tipping point with Ghosts, where it began a sort of gradual and clumsy decline, not so much numerically, like the numbers went down, but they still remained kind of like staggering if you look at them. You're still looking at like millions and millions and millions of units sold, billions of dollars made, but Call of Duty lost its cultural relevance after Ghosts. Ghosts was the game that kind of took the blinders off on what the formula is, what the underlying narratives are, and everybody just kind of went like, just a big old healthy shrug. So I don't think it's a very good game. I know I had like one more line that was supposed to go in there, but I'll be damned if I can remember what it was. So now we've got about 17 minutes for Q&A, where maybe I will remember what that line was and I'll interrupt you. But so I'm going to ramble just kind of aimlessly for about 40 seconds here while people line up for that microphone. There's, like I said, there's 17 minutes, so we've got about time for 2, maybe 3, if I can exercise some self-control. So let's make them great ones. Hello, do you have a great question?
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller. My question would be, given what we've said about Ghosts and, the games that in the series that came after, if you thought a Call of Duty game wanted to try and make itself become more relevant, what would your ideal game in that format look like?
Black Ops 2.
Fair enough. No notes.
They already did it. Yeah, I mean, not to be too trite with the answer, but they already did it. They experimented in Black Ops 2 with branching storylines, with a villain that had actual like comprehensible motivations and characterization, with actual mechanical through lines, like you can choose your loadout and your loadout persists from level to level, and there's actual sort of like meaningful choices being made in terms of like oh, this was a thing I forgot to mention. Flashbang grenades, a thing that is like a staple of Call of Duty games. Not only do you not really have control over whether or not they're in your loadout, you cannot throw a flashbang grenade unless someone yells at you, throw a flashbang grenade, and a prompt comes up, throw flashbang. It's wild. Like even its predecessors are like, well, yeah, of course you've got your grenades and you get to pick your, yeah, it's wild.
Howdy. With the game being you being escorted and on rails, do you think this game would be good for a sort of like least trigger pulls or like a quote unquote pacifist run?
You're being escorted, like maybe, like I know someone has done it in a pacifist run. Like it is part of the pacifist run that I know someone's done. I don't know how well it would work because your NPC companions are, you can't do anything without them, but they're also like profoundly ineffective in an actual firefight. So you can probably clear it 95% pacifist. There's a few, like if you exclude scripted, like you must take the shot moments, probably like pretty close, but it's going to be very boring.
Hi, so you jumped my mind a lot when you mentioned how the Marine Corps being a cult.
Yes.
Because I'm fresh off a rewatch of Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
So highly relevant, most of that film, and just kind of thinking on it more about, you know, there's no such thing as an anti-war film, game, whatever. There's only honest or dishonest. And I think a lot of us can agree that Call of Duty might be some of the most dishonest, somewhat. And so I think I'm just looking to see if you can pontificate a little bit more on like just where that dishonesty has gone, not just with this game, but like as they've started to go on in the future, as you said, because it became a lot more clear to people after this game.
It's not really until Advanced Warfare. Okay, so the first couple, like the first few World War II games are all just sort of like World War II hagiography. But then you get this whole middle stretch from like Modern Warfare through Ghosts, where, you know, they got derided as like, oh, these are just like military recruitment vehicles, which was not like strictly untrue, but they weren't really being led by that. They weren't like, it wasn't like the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Army was like at the end of the leash on like, here's where the project needs to go. Rather, they were being led by the companies that sell stuff to the military. It was like, oh, we want money to develop a gun that shoots underwater? So what if in a video game they had a gun that shoots underwater so we could show how cool a gun that shoots underwater is so we could get $1 billion to develop a gun that shoots underwater. Yeah. It's not really until Advanced Warfare that kind of like flips, which is kind of surprising because of how like tech focused, like near future tech focused Advanced Warfare is, but it's the one where it really becomes like, join the Marines, son. Yeah.
Crazy. Thank you.
Hi. So I had a question about your creative process. When you have
terrifying. Let's go. I'm ready.
When you have a list of ideas, what are you looking for out of those ideas that kind of draw you to them to make content? And when you start seeing things in those ideas that you're like, I can make content out of this, do you have kind of the mental control to pick out those specific ideas and go down those paths of research? Or do some ideas just kind of have this natural, compelling feeling about them where you can't escape it and you are kind of pushed to make those pieces of content, not because you entirely want to?
So I have a whole sort of like exploratory an early part of the process is sort of this exploratory. I'll have 3-4 different like possibilities floating around, and then it's just sort of a process of like workshopping them, needing them, doing pre-research, like doing initial research on them, and really just finding if like, okay, was the initial idea that or the initial quirk or thing that attracted to me, was it interesting? Did it lead other places? Was it substantive? So a good example of this is Man Tracks. I was working on a follow-up video to In Search of a Flat Earth, and I was reading through Robbie Davidson's book, Scientism Exposed, and I came across an image of a clearly fake fossil next to a picture of a dude named Aaron Judkins. And I'm like, one, that is the fakest thing I've ever seen. Two, who is this guy? You know, it's like, and the attribution was like, Aaron has found numerous fossils. I'm like, did he claim to find this one? Because that looks like a prop from a movie. And then in looking into that, like, because in just trying to find like what is that a photo of, like what is that actually a photo of, it wound up revealing this entire other story about like nested hoaxes, that like that was the Delk print, and so the Delk print was just one in a long line of like fake fossils that have been sold to Carl Baugh, but Carl Baugh only came to Glen Rose, Texas because of the work of these people before him, and they only knew about Glen Rose because of Carl Bird, who was a legitimate archaeologist who only wound up in Glen Rose because he came across a fake fossil sitting in a trading post in New Mexico. And I was like, okay, that's kind of a wild train of things, and also the fact that people have been making fake human footprints for like 100 years now, like that's weird. And yeah, so it's kind of like, it's like, does it lead to other places, or is it just kind of like, well, that's a neat subject, but it's like, that's kind of like, is it a 5-minute subject or is it a 45-minute subject? So that's kind of what we're exploring. And then the rest of it is just like, yeah, is it natural? Like, does it flow? Does it just kind of like, I don't want to say write itself, because the writing process is always like laborious, agonizing, and takes far longer than I ever want it to. But like, do I feel compelled to keep talking about it? Yeah. Because there's no way I make it through that laborious writing process if I don't feel like a compulsion to like, no, people like are gonna eat this up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Dan. I'm Zach. I would like to thank you for what I would describe as a generous take on the game Call of Duty Ghosts. Kind, some would say. I would like to make a brief point before a question. Call of Duty avoids talking politics by often positioning it as the conflict of 5 angry dudes. And I think this is perhaps the worst of it.
Yeah. There is an interesting sort of underlying idea of like America fighting a back foot defensive war after an economic decline, and that is expressed as like two brothers trying to shoot their dad's old boyfriend.
So yes, exactly. My question is mostly about how this sits in the franchise as a whole. They wanted to make a Ghosts 2. This has a hook. The fact that they did not, this is one of the rare, I think, vulnerabilities in Call of Duty's historic armor. Does this prove Call of Duty is mortal? And if so, is it still mortal, or is it a vampire now?
I mean, Call of Duty these days is just recycling itself. Like they're well into remake territory. I mean, they're selling more units than they ever have, but they're selling more units than they ever have off the back of nostalgia. Like literally, like, hey, remember before your kid was 12, you spent all weekend just playing Modern Warfare 2. Like that's literally their pitch these days. So like, I don't know. They're on Black Ops 6 or 7? Yeah.
6.
So, like, the Black Ops strain has kept going, and then otherwise they're just re-releasing old games.
Thank you very much.
Hi. I kind of half-formed this question when I got up and tried to figure out the rest of it while I was in line. So, in the American Tail 5 Goes West video, you talk about the value of bad art, and especially what that can, if I recall correctly, what that can sort of tell us about the creative process. Do you feel like This is going to sound insane. Comparing American Tail, Fievel Goes West, and Call of Duty Ghosts,
Yeah.
do you feel as though the way that games are bad now has progressed in a different way from how they were bad previously, and like why that might be?
I mean, the wild thing is that those two games are actually pretty close to being contemporaries. Like, they're only like 5 years apart.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I mean, part of the weird thing about Fievel Goes West is that it was a PS2 game released like well into the aughts, you know, on a CD-based optical disc. It is kind of weird, but you see, I think, a lot of the same things just at different scales. You know, Fievel Goes West is a crass commercial product being made by greedy people who are few in number and lacking in resources, and Call of Duty Ghosts is a creative product impelled on talented artists by a crass, greedy corporation that just in both cases, the game just kind of needs to exist to fill a slot on a shelf to sell units. And at the top level, like, the reason why they exist is ultimately that, and that's why Ghosts, like, that's why the people who are making Ghosts come into existence don't see anything wrong with, like, oh yeah, we'll just get some artists to start building random levels 3-4 years before the game even comes out, and we'll figure out how they, I don't know, that's a writer's problem. How do they, like, why are they on a aircraft carrier? I don't know. Hire somebody to figure that out and have them work 800 hours a week. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So, speaking of writing problems, something that maybe I'm not getting into because I have never Call of Duty, so this is not part of the buy-in that I'm familiar with. So all of the ghosts and the special ops that are featured in the game are all just, they're not super soldiers, they're just dudes, right?
They're just dudes, yeah.
They're just normal dudes.
Yeah.
So...
Good at their jobs.
Right.
I mean, minus the fact they keep dying.
So is the fact that they are able to have like this superhuman ability to, you know, steer history in this weird way, like dovetail into the jingoism that their cocks are so big that they can do this and the other people can't, or is that kind of like?
I mean, that's Rourke, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that the Fed was able to repel an American counter-invasion and just kind of stalemate until they captured Rourke.
Okay.
Yeah. And he gives them their potency so that they can launch their very numerous but distinctly less girthy
yes.
tungsten rods.
With his potent Americanness and
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Thanks.
2 minutes.
All right. Quick.
Lightning round.
So the dog in Ghosts, from what I understand, was added as an apology because the last game made you kill a bunch of dogs, and they were real dogs, and they died in real life. Do you accept their apology?
I don't feel like I am deputized to accept that apology.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's go. Lightning round. No,
Awesome.
no.
All right.
No. Next person. It was already funny. It was already funny. Let's go. Lightning round.
Big fan. Love YouTube. So from your opinion, I would like kind of say like Treyarch is more auteur of the Call of Duty studios because like they actually had a track record before they got acquired by Activision. Any other studio, they don't really know what the fuck they're doing. But at least Treyarch, they at least swing for the fields when they make a Call of Duty, especially with the Black Ops and World at War. Do you somewhat agree with that, or?
Oh boy, Treyarch versus Infinity Ward versus Sledgehammer versus Raven. I'm not that invested, and the thing is that in playing through all of them, like I don't think they're as different from each other as like. Maybe I'm just not attuned to the things that like the people who are like deeply invested see in that, but wobble hand. I don't want to undersell the things that the other studios have achieved. I think all 4 studios employ talented artists and game makers who are good at least delivering the best that they can. So I don't know. There's my diplomatic answer. We've got 2 more. Can we fit them in 35 seconds?
So in your presentation, you said that Call of Duty used to be the game. What would you say has become the game nowadays?
Fortnite.
Fair.
All right. 10-second answer.
Yeah. Would you basically say that Ghost was Call of Duty's World of Warcraft Cataclysm?
Yes. Okay. We have we're having a meet and greet downstairs in Bandland by the big front door. So if you want to do a meet and greet, I'm going to take off like a bat out of hell right away. And if you want merch, if you want the I Don't Know Dan Olsen shirt, they're available on catawampus.inc. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.